Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So as in keeping, I want to call it to order the redistricting meeting for today. First off, I want to recognize that Representative Clayton was called away on an emergency and wanted to thank Minority Leader Representative Sawyer for sitting in on her place. Thank you, sir, and welcome to the committee. Okay, Jordan, if you could hand out the official copy cover sheet of the Prairie Dog and the Mushroom Rock. Since we had just the screenshots last time, I just want to make sure everybody has that. There was also a request in here that we put the counties on there. They are in the upper left-hand corner. They're with the two-letter abbreviations. It's a little hard to read because it's small, but when you do look at it online, those counties are listed. What's the date today?
24th.
Thank you. Totally forgot. Okay, okay, perfect. All right, so the extras are over there to the left if you need to get a copy. Also, all the committee members received copies of the minutes for the 18th, 20th, and 21st. And do I have a motion? Representative Ralph.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Owens? Representative Owens. And any discussions? None? All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes pass. Okay. All right, map introductions, as we do with every time. Now, one thing I wanted to highlight is that it's not just the congressionals. We can accept maps for the state house, the state senate, and the school boards if you happen to have them. Feel free to go ahead and bring those in at any moment whenever we meet. So I don't see any map introductions for now. Okay. So with that, I intend to work House Bill 2522. I'm sorry, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't have an introduction, but these last two, do we have bill numbers on those now?
We do not have bill numbers. We will have them tomorrow, though.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. You do have another introduction, or you do not? Okay. Thank you. Again, my intention is to work House Bill 2522. Jordan, if you'll just take a minute and just kind of refresh everybody on that bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholland, Legislative Research. I'll go ahead and share my screen here in just a second. Again, this is Jordan Milholland, Legislative Research. Apologize for the delay there. So I've got the Ad Astra 1 bill in front of you. You can see the statewide map here. The map has a deviation of 0 persons with a 0% deviation. This is the map with the 2012 districts overlaid on it. The map splits the counties of Pawnee, Douglas, Wyandotte. And again, I noted that the plan is a 0% deviation with 0 persons. I think that should be all I have to share on this plan. Thanks.
Okay, with that, what is the will of the committee? Representative Ralph?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee report House Bill 2522 favorable for passage.
Okay, a second. Representative Hoheisel. I'd like to open up for discussions, and I have the First Amendment that I'd like to offer. Jordan, if you could talk about that amendment. It fixes the same thing we heard in the Senate, fixes the reservation where it was split in half, and then makes a subsequent adjustment to get us back to 0 deviation. And again, with all keeping this as a complete map, it's not just a change of a line. Jordan, did you want to describe anything, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholland, Legislative Research Department. I'm going to be pulling up the new map here on the screen for everyone to see. So as the chair mentioned, this map is an edit of the previous Ad Astra 1 map. I will zoom in just a little bit closer so you can see the area where the map was adjusted at, right around this Native American reservation here in the 2nd District. And then there's a subsequent adjustment made to get it back to 0% deviation. I'll zoom out so you can see that table at the bottom. It's a 0% deviation with a 0-person deviation. And that concludes my review. Thanks.
Okay, with that, I move my amendment, seconded by Representative Hoheisel. Any discussion? Representative Miller.
So if I'm reading the amendment correctly, it clearly puts the 2 reservations in 2 distinct congressional districts, thus splitting that community of interest. And by the way, we might want to identify the reservations as the Kickapoo and the Potawatomi, if I'm not mistaken. And this would put the Kickapoo in the 2nd District and the Potawatomi in the 1st. Is all that correct for the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholland. That is my understanding of this map.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I would have, do we know how the deviation occurred in reference to getting it back into 0 deviation?
Jordan, you want to answer that? Did you? Jordan, please go ahead, Nate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholland, Legislative Research. I would have to go back and compare these 2 maps just to provide that answer, but let me take a look here for you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, the reason why I ask, because that is a pretty large geographic change, and I was just curious what communities and/or residents may have been included in those particular maps.
Fair enough. And you'll get him the exact numbers on that deviation?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just kind of looking at this and knowing the area just a little bit, I think that a good portion of that is unpopulated area, so that's how you would keep that deviation, I think.
Okay, no other discussion. I close on my amendment. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Amendment passes.
So this is the map.
We're back on the bill. 1 second. All right, thank you. I just wanted to clarify a point. Are there any other amendments? Representative Burrows.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not ready to offer an amendment right this moment, but I would like to have discussion in reference to the map, if we may, 2522, or the sub that may be coming forward. I believe that we've seen the testimony that came forward in brief testimony, but I also believe that it does warrant some discussion if we're going to move it out. So I would hope that we wouldn't just pass it out, that it should, any members have questions, that they can ask those before you choose to move out of committee, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to make sure if there were any amendments up front, and if there's not any more amendments, then absolutely to have the discussion. So if there's no other amendments to offer, let's go ahead and have the discussion.
Representative Ballard.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you indicated that part of this map, Pawnee and Douglas County, was put into first. My objection is going to be first with Douglas County being placed in the first district. It makes no sense to have Douglas County, which is the county seat, go into the first district. This reminds me of part of a split that occurred 20 years ago when there was another congressman running for office in Johnson County. And part of 20 years ago, we were in the third district. We were split right in the middle of Lawrence on Iowa Street. And the portion of Douglas County, or I should say Lawrence, east stayed in the third district, and west was moved to the second district. 10 years later, all of Lawrence was placed in the second district. And now, but at least when that happened, all of not only Lawrence, but all of Douglas County was placed. In this case, you take just the city of Lawrence and place it there, and the rest of the county stays in second. It makes no sense. I've heard from my constituents, and we also heard on our 5-day tour around the state, to be fair in the maps, not to disenfranchise voters, make sure that areas that had minorities were kept intact. And we look at this. So when we think in terms of the first district, we really don't have that much in common with a rural area when we're urban. Most of our commuters either go to Kansas City or Topeka. There had to be a purpose for why Douglas County, mainly Lawrence, was put into the first district. I realize that K-State is in the first district. Maybe that's the connect that's there. But you would have to look far and wide to find a state that has put two major universities in the same district. I also object to Johnson County and Wyandotte being divided. We heard repeatedly on our tour not to divide them. I realize that Wyandotte County has a larger number and we have to do something. But we have maps that have demonstrated that we can change that and adjust it without having to move Lawrence to one or Wyandotte to the northern goes to second, and Johnson County goes to Miami, Franklin, and I can't think of the other one. There has to be a purpose, and to me, it's a political purpose. People may not like that Lawrence, more liberal, votes blue, though it has a lot of Republicans there too. I don't know how that is justifiable. I also understand that there are 19 precincts that are split in this map. And we haven't started talking about the state maps yet. On tour, we heard from the county clerk in Lawrence that around the Lecompton area, when you have precincts split, that means that you have to have separate ballots and you have to do everything else in that area, and that becomes very complicated and it is expensive as well. I don't think we have to do that. There are maps that we can still accomplish what the census might say and keep fairness and not tilted in the favor of individuals that we want to protect or that we wish to win. I object. It is not justifiable, and it makes no sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most of you know I've been around a while. I first got elected in 1986, and previous to this reapportionment, I've been directly or indirectly involved in 4 previous reapportionments. In all my time of doing that, I've never seen a map that was this politically gerrymandered. I mean, putting the city of Lawrence in the 1st district with rural Kansas, dividing Wyandotte County, the city of Kansas City, basically in half. That's clearly gerrymandering. You know, we did a public tour, and I went to every single stop. We got over 500 pieces of information. The majority of those people said, don't split up the Kansas City area. We heard people from every congressional district say that. And in those over 500 different pieces of information, not a single one said put Lawrence in the 1st district. Nobody said that. It really makes me wonder when I saw this, actually, when I first saw this map, I actually thought it was a joke. I thought, this can't be the real map. They would not do this. It's very much gerrymandered. It looks like a salamander. You put it on it. So I really did think it was a joke. I said, oh, they're just throwing this out there so when the real map comes out, we won't think it's so bad. But the Senate passed this map, and here we are debating it today, so I'm beginning to believe maybe you guys really want to pass this map. I do have a question, though. Where did this map come from? I mean, who drew this map? Like I said, I've never seen a map that this politically gerrymandered in my time up here. I'm just curious. Who actually drew this map? Does anybody have the answer to that?
You want to go ahead and say that? Just tell me. Oh, okay, I'll just tell you. They don't disclose who drew that map, so I do not know.
So we don't know where this map came from. So transparency, we have the most transparency. We have a map that's the most politically gerrymandered map I've ever seen, and we don't know, it just kind of came out of, who knows? All right, thank you.
Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to have a couple of questions centered around process. I'm looking at the guidelines that this committee voted on and approved that we all decided would be our guiding document as we make these decisions. One says that the district should be as compact as possible and contiguous. And I guess my question on this is, I think we have in the bigger packet a rating system that tells us how compact a district is. We have 6 maps available. is there any way that I could get a ranking of the 6 maps before us in order of compactness and contiguousness?
Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholland, Legislative Research. Within those packets, there is a REOC measure of compactness. If you'd like me to, I can pull the numbers from each of those packets and let you know the range of those numbers and in what order they go.
I would like that.
All right, thanks. I'll get to work on that.
Could I ask another question while he's pulling that information together? The next line on our rules tell us that there should be a recognition of communities of interest, social, cultural, racial, ethnic, and economic interest common to the population of the area. I've pulled some census data on my own to look at, but I guess on this question, I wonder, have we in this committee created any data sets that we've looked at or made part of our discussion or plan to make part of our discussion to verify and validate that we've taken this into consideration and that we've followed our own rule and that we've actually looked at information that identifies those communities of interest?
I'm sorry, say the question part again.
The question is, have we actually brought into our discussion any data points that can show us, that we can show the public that we've considered these social, cultural, racial, ethnic, and economic interest? When I look at some of these communities, I see pretty disparate economic conditions. I see a lot of disparity in racial and ethnic makeup. I just wonder if we put in our rules that we're going to consider this, and this is the rules that we made for ourselves, have we produced any data points that illustrate we've followed our own rules?
As far as I understand on this, Representative, there's no data point specifically to what you're saying. I would assume as we're going through this process that each of us would be collecting and putting those ideas together, or those data points. But as far as what's published here, we have what they've published and going through that process.
So I guess a follow-up question on that would be, how are we demonstrating to the public that we've taken these things into consideration?
I believe we're demonstrating through the process of what we've been going through and talking about it. So if you have points that you think are not, then I would say bring up your points at this time so that way you can raise those issues.
Well, I can do that. Let's see. If I look at the 3rd district, according to this map, we've put Johnson, Anderson, Franklin, and Miami County together. And I look at a couple of points here. There's a huge difference between Johnson County, for instance, median home value, and Anderson County. There's about a $39,000 difference in median household income between Johnson County and Anderson County. Huge differences in racial disparity. Languages, I mean, I can go on, but I won't belabor the point, but I can do this on my own independently and raise some of these issues. But it seems to me that if we're going to put in our rules that we're going to consider these things, that we would also include in our discussion some matrix through which we could measure that. And I'll let up right now, but I do want to return to the compactness rating because I think that's going to be important for the committee to see.
Thank you. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's interesting that when we're in the middle of this, we start talking about rural and urban and not being compatible with each other. Looking at some of the demographics I'm looking at Douglas County, I'm looking at Finney and Ford County, and actually it's very surprising the demographics are the same in all three of, not exactly the same, but for the most part, they're pretty close to being the same. I really am not sure that we have as much of a issue that one side of the state doesn't understand the other side of the state as much as everybody thinks so. Would we all love for the first district to take in probably half the counties that they do? We would, but unfortunately the numbers are not going to allow us to do that. And as population does change, more of the east part of the state is going to have to go into the first district. And I mean, really, I mean, you look at let's just take the Asian population in Douglas is 2.4%. In Finney County, it's 0.95%, but in Ford County, it's 2.2%. I mean, you take the African-American community in Finney County is 4%. In Douglas County, it's 4.4%. I'm not sure that there's as big of a difference when we talk about demographics between all the communities in the west part and the east part. So I for one, I'm not as concerned about that, I guess, as others. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am concerned. Those dynamics that you gave me are not compelling. I think when I look at Western Kansas declining in population, possibility if they continue to go down, they may lose representation. Gaining 108,000 could actually help. But I don't think it should be at our expense. In D of your congressional redistricting, you say whole counties should be in the same congressional district to the extent possible while still meeting guidelines in number 2. And number 2 was districts are to be as nearly equal to 734,470 population is practicable. If you would look in our map, Prairie Dogs, we were able to adjust it. We kept our native populations together. And we didn't have to the extent possible. It was possible to keep them, to keep Lawrence in second. The will was not to keep them, but it was possible. And I would ask for someone, even though you don't know who, you know who introduced this map, you choose not to say who did so. I would say, what is the justification for moving it when the extent possible you didn't have to?
Jordan, if you had the answers to those two questions, correct? Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholm, Legislative Research. Circling back to Representative Burrows' first question about how the numbers had been shifted to go back to the zero deviation in Ad-Astra 2. It appears that that piece of Jackson County with the Kickapoo Reservation had 690 people in it. And so when that was moved to the second district, there were 690 people taken out of Douglas County and shifted to that district to equal out that change. And if he needs the specific VTDs, I can provide those. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Jordan Milholm, Legislative Research. So I went through the packets of, there were 7 maps that I have in my list here that we've had in this committee. So I went through and took the mean REOC score from each of those, which is in those packets. The REOC score, I won't get into all the technical aspects of how that's calculated, but it's basically looking at a score between 0 and 1, with the closer to 1 being the most compact and the closer to 0 being less compact. Four of the maps had the exact same REOC score, average REOC score of 0.39, Ad Astra 1, 2, Mushroom Rock 2, and Sunflower. And then working past that, Prairie Dog was at 0.45, and then Blue Stem Congress and Buffalo 2 were at 0.51 and 0.52.
Representative Probst for a second time.
So I just want to make sure I understand that right. Based on those numbers, it is clear that there are 3 options that are more compact than the option we're hearing today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, 4 of those maps were at 0.39, and then Blue Stem, Buffalo 2, and Prairie Dog were both closer to 1, with 1 being the most compact.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, can I have one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
I'll acknowledge that this is a difficult and a layered work. It's when we talk about communities of interest and bringing them together or keeping them whole, looking at geographic, economic, cultural differences, that it is a lot of layers in this work that you have to consider. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. But I guess I'm curious, since we've established that we've violated our own rule on compactness, since we've established that we haven't collectively as a committee looked at some of the communities of interest or the things that tie people together, or at least we don't have data points on that. What is our driving force on this? When we look at the 3rd district, for instance, we know we have the evidence, as Representative Sawyer said, 500 pieces of testimony saying keep the core of Kansas City together. And if we're not doing that, there must be another layer that we're looking at and elevating above that. And I wonder if that's something we've established.
Are there any other discussion points? Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate my colleagues bringing forth the questions they have. What hasn't been discussed is why we chose to split Wyandotte County. And as a legislator from Wyandotte County, knowing our ethnic makeup, what does this map do to the minority voting strength of Wyandotte County?
Jordan, are you familiar with that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milhon, Legislative Research. So within our packet, we do have the breakdown. You can look at different racial metrics within these reports. If the chair would like me to, I can point out where those are in the packet. Okay. Thank you. If you'll just give me 1 second, I'll pull that up. Might be more than just a second, so.
Yeah, I did. And Mr. Chairman, I bring that question forward because it's been expressed numerous times about the ethnicity of the county that I've had the honor and pleasure of representing for the many years I've been here. And we are a proud county, and we embrace that diversity. And to have someone present a map that impacts that diversity to the extent it mutes voices is of great concern. And was that the intent of the map when it was presented initially, to mute minority voices in electing public officials in a congressional map?
I mean, who do you want to answer that question? Is that your statement?
Yeah. No, and Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm just asking because I think it's important, knowing the intent behind this map to disenfranchise a community that is made up of the ethnic division that we have and the ethnic population that we have in Wyandotte County. And as many of you, I attended every town hall across this state in a very compressed time frame that allowed those within the public to visit with us. But in those visits, those town halls, there was no data that we could demonstrate that we were aware of. We were just really gathering information. And through all of that information, reams of testimony was stated clearly: keep Metropolitan, Wyandotte County, and Johnson County collectively whole. And when I sensed that this map does not do that, it raises a question. When we were in Garden City, two totally economic-driven communities that are of different economies, and we heard it from the testimony down there, agriculture and cattle and meatpacking plants, but yet in committee, we come back here and we've married those two to a certain extent because of the ethnic division within Wyandotte County. Now, granted, we're in Congressional District 2 at this time, but at that time, it was suggested to me that we would be going to Congressional District 1. We are full of questions today, Mr. Chairman, and I really sense that this map has been fast-tracked. We're less than 14 days in on discussion, and yet we have a map that's already been presented to the Senate in a compressed time frame, hit the Senate floor, and all of a sudden was found to be not in compliance with how they felt with the community of interest, and that being the tribal nations. And I commend them for putting the tribal nations collectively together, give them one voice. But that same criteria should apply to Wyandotte County, because we are a community of interest, Mr. Chairman, and that community of interest has a lot of same similarities as the community to the south. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask at this time, the data on this map was analyzed and it looks like there's an obvious shift in partisan leanings. Can someone speak to why we went with a map that shifts the partisan concentration in District 3 so significantly when we have other maps that don't do that? And I believe my colleague from Hutchinson brought that up. May I get an answer to that question, Mr. Chairman?
Representative Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to weigh in for a moment with more of a comment than anything else. And I think maybe the processes on the Senate side gave a little bit of muddiness to this in terms of how they addressed it in the last time they were together and passed out this bill. It has always been my experience in my short time, and there's been many others in here who've been here much longer, that when we have hearings on bills, we have conferees, we have questions made, and we recognize members of the committee in order to get information and gather information. And then when we work a bill, that's a time for statements to be made by members of the committee and to address their concerns, but not another round of questioning, and certainly not a round of questioning amongst members in an attempt to try to get folks back on the record for, in essence, a second bite. So in fairness to the chairman, I think at this point in time, if there are rhetorical questions to be raised, that's fine. But I don't think this is the stage at which, when we're working this bill, to be asking questions that should have been part of the hearing in this particular matter. We're for these bills or against these bills. And I just wanted to make the comment in terms of the process that I think this bogs us down to think that we're going to ask questions back and forth amongst members, as opposed to, when we work the bill, let's talk about our statements and our positions in regard to the legislation that's in front of us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And perhaps my eyes are deceiving because some of this really tiny stuff is a little more difficult. I didn't bring magnifying glass today. But if I look at the prairie dog map, isn't Johnson County split?
Jordan, if you could answer that.
What is it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, looking at the prairie dog map, and I can bring it up on the screen if you wanted to see a zoomed-in portion of that, but it does appear that the 3rd district does split Johnson between the 3rd and the 2nd.
Okay, and then when I look at the Buffalo map, I see Johnson County split. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholland. I'd have to pull that map up really quickly. Yes, it does appear to be split between the 2nd and 3rd districts.
Thank you.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't recall any part of our process up to this point as being set aside to ask questions other than of conferees. I didn't have any questions for the conferees because I agreed with almost everything they had to offer. And almost everything they had to offer runs contra to what is being proposed now. That's why it's important to me to learn a little bit about who's behind it. I'm trying to recollect, these were all introduced as committee bills. I do remember Representative Hoffman saying that he wanted to, I can't remember if it was sunflower or Ad Astra. He said it was similar to what was done 10 years ago. Was that Ad Astra or sunflower?
It was sunflower.
Okay, then what member was it that asked that Ad Astra be introduced by the committee? Is you?
I introduced it.
But you don't know where it came from?
I don't know who the author was of the omitted portion that came through the whole process. I know it was a group of a lot of people that were part of the process.
What? What? I didn't understand that answer.
Okay.
That's why I said what?
It was a group of legislators that got together and put that map together.
And you were part of that group.
I had a play in that, yes.
You were the most omnipotent of the group, I would assume. I mean, you're a modest man, but I can say it. Okay, well, that helps me. So in that group discussion, what were the compelling points to offer this particular map? How might I be convinced to vote for it?
So, Representative, I was trying to keep within what we're having people make their comments as they go. As I looked at this, there's multiple ways to write a map. There are so many different ways to do this, and it's a matter of how you start. And in this case, unlike some others, it starts with Johnson County being the core and moving out from there. And it's all based off population as you're going through the process, and that's how it ended up into the current format that it's in.
So it'd be fair to say it's a Johnson County-driven map.
Initial decision, when you look at it, was the decision there.
And as far as the statement that my friend from Wichita just made a moment ago as to what counties are split on the other maps and so forth, I think the point that I understood from those people talking about the greater Kansas City area is they asked that it be kept as much intact as possible, recognizing that the greater Kansas City area, if we call that just Wyandotte and Johnson, would be too big to be in a single district. But the solution that's driven by this map is contrary to what they were asking, understanding that there would have to be one or both those counties split. What's happened here is we've added 3 other counties to District 3, making the split of Wyandotte even more dramatic than it needed to be. That's the problem with the split, because everyone recognizes there's too many people currently in just those 2 counties to comprise just one district. But it looks like we've not mitigated that split. Instead, we've aggravated it by adding additional counties outside the greater Kansas City area. am new to the process, so my other friend from Wichita, when he used this term gerrymandering, I had to look that up to find out what it meant. And I learned, among the other things, it's considered a corruption, almost always considered a corruption of the democratic small d process. And I believe that's indeed what this is. I looked up salamander, and those little animals resemble greatly this map. So I understand where part of that word, the mander of gerrymander, originates in it. It's used to describe maps that resemble the reptile salamander, and certainly this one does, and I don't think it needs to. And just coming back to the point made by my friend from Reno, and actually the point was made by research. My friend from Reno asked the question, research made the point that there are several maps that are much more compact and contiguous than the one we're looking at, and that greatly disturbs me. But I thank you for the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I knew Elbridge Gerry. I worked with Elbridge Gerry, and Elbridge Gerry was a friend of mine. Little Lloyd Benson reference. This is not an...
I know him very well because that's not even how you pronounce his name. It's a hard G. It's pronounced.
Elbridge Gerry?
Yes, sir.
Oh, very
Your
good.
Friend.
We were on a first name basis, so we never really got to that point. What this looks to me like more than anything else is that 1, 3, and 4 were designed to be as compact as possible, given the population, and then 2 caught whatever was left over. So it doesn't look like 2 was drawn with political implications in mind so much as it was the leftover when 3 got cut out of it. But I do want to thank, by the way, the testimony and the recommendations of the committee for telling me that I'm not actually part of the real Johnson County. I appreciate the heck out of that. I plan on using that testimony when going to the tax assessor's office as the intermodal and the New Century Manufacturing Center continues to pump money into Johnson County. That's going to be real valuable information to know that I'm not actually part of the real Johnson County, the part that we can just cut off. I appreciate the heck out of that. But as it stands, I think this is certainly a good first step for the map-making process. I see it's keeping Johnson County whole. That's important to me. It's important to my constituents. Might be important to some folks here. It might not be, and I get it. But I will be supporting the Ad Astra 2 map. And I thank you for your time. Oh wait, there was one other thing I wanted to say. There was a brief mention, and I wrote it down so I could remember it, because of the political leanings being changed dramatically. I don't have that information. Is that something that's been printed up? It's not in my folder. Is that something that's been printed up to show how the demographics of political demographics have changed in these?
Jordan.
I'd be very interested
Thank you, Mr.
in
Chair.
that.
So those voter registration numbers or political numbers are not part of our normal technical review packet, but we could look into any particular plans on request.
Well, I heard them referenced. That's why I'm asking, because I hadn't seen that. I'd like to. I think it would be very interesting to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Jordan, you did have an answer for Representative Burrow's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholm, Legislative Research. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again so I can bring up the report. So our technical review reports have a number of different ways to look at the population and racial composition of these districts. So this first report that you're looking at, apologize, it's a little bit hard to see on the screen. I'll try to zoom in here. So the first report that we have in our packet, it's on page 14 of the packet that's available online. It takes the 2012 congressional lines and applies that to the state with 2020 members. So just as an example, according to this report, District 1, as the lines are currently sitting today, has 700,773. District 1 in the plan Ad Astra 2 has 734,470, which again, as I noted, that's what each of these districts will show because that's what the plan was drawn with. So these numbers on the top correspond to the districts as they sit today, and then the bottom number is the plan. Then moving to the right, you can see the different racial categories. This shows, as a district sit today, the statistics for each of those, the number of population, and then the number of population within that plan. And it goes across to several different race categories. The next report I was going to show you, page, I guess I'll have to zoom out so I can scroll more easily through this document. We also have a report of the same information on voting age population among those districts and different racial category breakouts. There's also a Hispanic population page which compares some different categories. Also, there's a population page on page 18 that tells the percentages of population contained in each district and then which district they are currently in with those 2012 lines. And then there's another Hispanic plan comparison that you can look at, and voting age population for the Hispanic race category that you could look at. And I'd be happy to elaborate further if there's any. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other discussion? Okay, Representative Pro, third time.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. As we continue the discussion, I think of more questions.
Well,
I asked a question earlier about what our primary motivation is, and it was left unanswered. But the representative from maybe Johnson County made me think of this. I guess in my mind, if we have an overwhelming amount of testimony that said we want to view the metro area and keep it as whole as possible, again with the recognition that there are too many people there to keep both Wyandotte and Johnson County together as one, but we definitely heard the testimony that economically, culturally, that Kansas City metro area considers itself a community of interest. Why we chose the option that incorporated three additional counties, split that. I mean, I'm just trying to understand what our motivation was for saying, okay, we have this testimony that this is a community, but we're instead going to do this other thing that pulls in three additional counties. Does that question make sense?
okay, did you? Representative Esau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've remained quiet because I wasn't sure I had anything specific to add to the discussion that would help us in evaluating the map that we had before us, but a couple of things that have come up recently make me realize I could add something I hope of help to people. We absolutely can't leave Johnson and Wyandotte intact as complete counties. We all know that. Therefore, we have to find a way to divide them. Either we divide them straight down the county line, which we heard nobody wants us to do, or we divide one county or both counties in a way to make the numbers get as close to zero as we can. Having played with maps, not just recently, but over the last few months, you have to go south with Johnson County. You have to go north with Wyandotte County if you draw the lines that way. Historically, we've had these counties to the south of Johnson County in the 3rd District. I've campaigned down there. I can tell you that the part of Johnson County I live in has very much in common with parts of Miami and parts of Franklin. But I can also tell you that when we start looking into some of the other things that we're told to consider, such as racial diversity, or have we put too many people of one group or another in a district to dilute their voice or to put their voice only into one place, I personally start to get a little offended because my neighbor and I may not look alike. We may agree on absolutely everything, either politically or not political. We may share many things in common. Our race doesn't determine that, and what we look like doesn't determine that. So that one very much frustrates me when we start spending a lot of time on that, especially when I do go out to some of the other counties and see that they don't look just like my county either, because different people have moved to different places. We do tend to congregate with people that we share much in common with, whether that is cultural or whether that is how we like to vote. And I see that as I walk precincts. I see that as I walk neighborhoods. All the neighborhoods in my very compact district are not identical, and yet they share much in common. So we have to come up with a map that works, one that will get through the courts. This isn't my ideal map. I actually like a different map that no one has seen that I've played with. But I could vote for this map, even though on paper it may look gerrymandered. I know the numbers as they are drawing them up and as they are working on it. You have to say, well, I'm 500 people short. I'm 1,000 people short. Can I draw a line through this part of a county and not split a community of interest? Can I keep this city intact in this district? It's a lot of fun, and it pulls your hair out because you're trying to make it work. So I don't have a big problem with this map, even though I have some issues with this map. I can vote for it. I might want to vote for a different one. But I'm glad that we've had the discussion, and I keep coming back to, we have to split Johnson and Wyandotte County somehow. It has to happen. Where do we draw that line? Is this the way we draw the line? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the prior speaker. I'm going to get right to the point. I'm going to provide an opportunity for you to vote for another map. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask for a substitute motion, and that be a substitute motion to replace the Ad Astra 2 map, and I believe that's that's 2522, with the Buffalo 2 map, House Bill 2521. That map was the map that was introduced by myself on behalf of the League of Women Voters. They're very transparent. They want to come forward, and that map was asked to be sponsored, Mr. Chairman, and I believe you sponsored Blue Stem, which was the League of Women Voters map, but Buffalo 2 has the deviations down to 0. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to substitute House Bill 2521, known as Buffalo 2, in place of the Ad Astra 2 map, sub 2522.
Is there a second? Representative Probst, second. Open for discussion. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for the maker of the motion, if you'll answer. Sure. Thank you, sir. Does this map break apart Johnson County?
It does.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I look at the Buffalo map, and then I look at the Blue Stem, which was the League of Women Voters, can someone explain to me what the differences are in those maps? Because I don't see a difference.
Jordan, can you please address that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholland, Legislative Research. Yeah, I'd have to take a few minutes to compare the two maps, but I can start looking and at least tell you the county splits and maybe a few other data points between the two.
Okay, and I'm just, and I'm just going off of these, and these aren't the best because of size, is they look identical. So perhaps the representative that's making this substitute motion could explain to me the difference between those two maps. If he doesn't want to.
Believes it was, Jordan, are you able to do anything quickly, or is it going to take a minute? All right, see what you can do. Do we have any other we'll come back. Are there any other discussion items? Representative Probst.
Just want to put on the record that according to the rankings we had, this was the second most compact map based on our ranking system.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In answer to the hatless lady from Sedgwick, they look almost identical because they are almost identical. As I understand the maker of the motion, the only thing that was done to the map proposed by the league was to address the deviations, which weren't considerable, but they were not as close to the ideal as what the courts expect. So the only changes that were made to that map were to address the deviation. And as far as precise answer, only Jordan, I think, give the answer. But that, in essence, is why they look so much alike, because they are so much alike.
Thank you, Representative. Any other discussion items? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that Buffalo 2 map, House Bill 2521, offered as a substitute, has been clearly discussed across the entire state and has had a tremendous amount of testimony presented to keep as much of metropolitan Wyandotte and Johnson counties collectively together. The deviation is right on. The communities of interest are right on. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I would close.
Okay, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. The noes have it. Division has been called. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. And you'll need to record. We've got Representative Sawyer, or just count, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4. All those opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Mr. Chairman,
The amendment fails.
may I be recorded as aye? Me?
Yes, absolutely.
As aye?
Likewise.
Okay, we'll go right around. Representative Miller as an aye, please record that. Representative Sawyer, Representative Probst, and Representative Ballard. All aye, and Representative Burrows, sorry. Okay, with that, we're back on the bill as amended. So, other discussions? With none, Representative Ralph, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the discussion today. This committee has been diligently at work for over a year now. That includes individual committee members, the committee chair particularly, staff involved with this, as well as dealing with the census numbers to come out in this matter. And I know that individual members have all been involved not only in the town hall meetings and such, but individually in conversations with constituents. Seen several people even posting about doing their homework in certain circumstances. Many of the things have to occur in this process as we deal with this first of 4 maps that we are charged with creating. And sometimes I think it's important for us to remember that we're charged with creating not only the congressional maps, but then the House Senate maps, the House Senate, the House of Representatives, as well as the school board. So we still have quite a bit of work ahead of us, even if we can get this particular matter moved through. And that's what we're charged with. We've known this was coming since 2012, both the public and us. This is a process we have to go through every time, and this didn't sneak up on any of us. And then again, probably in some regard, it does sneak up on us in any event. In understanding this process, there are several things that become apparent. The first is there are an infinite number of maps that can be drawn. I think we all recognize that we could draw maps all day, as several of the representatives talked about fiddling around, if you will, with some of the software that's available. And the other thing we know is that any line that we draw, as a matter of fact, every line that we draw in whatever map ultimately comes out of this committee, out of the House, out of the Senate, will divide neighbors. In some fashion, there will be neighbors falling on both sides of a line. So what we have to do is the best we can. And in doing that, the first thing that informs our process is that we are bound to create districts with no deviation in their numbers, and this map does that. That's our first overall, the umbrella that informs everything we do. From there, everything becomes actually challenging in the map that is, in preparing a map that is reasonable and fair in its attempt to create congressional districts in a state that is experiencing population challenges over a wide geographic area. That's what causes us so many problems, and particularly even being from Southwest Kansas, it becomes even more apparent. But to a reasonable consideration, communities of interest are acknowledged and considered in this map. Communities of interest are not defined by single characteristics. Social, cultural, ethnic, and economic concerns are considered within the confines of a state that's experiencing depopulation in many areas. Depopulation, that's kind of a kind term for saying we're losing people across the state in most areas. This map gives global consideration to these areas, and whereas some of the other possibilities seem to rely heavily on references to urban and versus rural, rural is asked to do some pretty heavy lifting in this committee and in conversations abounding. I think you'll notice that as a default position, about any time we're talking about doing one map and then having to put somebody somewhere else, immediately one of the first things you hear is, well, that's a rural area. Other proposals suggest a district that touches the four extreme corners of this state because they are rural. And I would suggest to folks, and I know that I'm a little tender to this subject, and I try not to do that because working with our urban colleagues is something that's important, but I do get a little touchy about that because I suspect that folks in Cherokee County and Morton County and Cheyenne County and Nemaha County would be the first to tell you that even though they might consider themselves rural in some conversations, there's hardly any other way that they might consider themselves to be communities of interest in a congressional district. Yet, there is going to be some of that that has to occur, and we realize that from those places that truly are rural areas. Mr. Chair, this is a reasonable and a fair attempt to draw districts in compliance with the law and our constituent expectations, and I close and move this bill. Close on House substitute for House Bill 2522.
As amended.
No, it's a substitute, right. So
I'm just closing.
It was second. Just making sure we get it all correct. So, all those in favor of House substitute for House 2522, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Okay. The ayes have it. Division has been called. So all those in favor, raise your hand. 11. All those opposed, raise your hand. 4, 5. We have 5.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recorded, please.
Yes, and, okay. So Minority Leader Sawyer, Representative Probst, Representative Ballard, Representative Burrows, Representative Miller, to be recorded as no votes. The motion passes. I want to thank you for your time today. I appreciate the comments. Minority Leader Sawyer, thank you for coming in and stepping in at the last second. I know she's really wish you could be here, but thank you, sir, for being here. Thank you all for all your comments and your patience through this process. One team, one Kansas, we are adjourned.